Picture this. You're sitting in your living room when someone knocks on your door. You open it, and standing there is your wife, the same wife you were convicted of murdering 10 years ago. The same wife whose body was supposedly found decomposed in a reservoir. The same wife whose death sent you to prison for a decade of hell you'll never get back. This isn't fiction. This isn't a movie plot. This happened to Tyler Mitchell in 2005, and what you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about our justice system. I'm about to tell you the story of the most shocking wrongful conviction in modern history. A case so unbelievable that when it first broke, even seasoned legal experts refused to believe it was real. But it was real. Every devastating detail of it. In 1994, Tyler and Vanessa Mitchell lived what appeared to be a typical American life in a small rural community. Tyler worked construction jobs when he could find them, while Vanessa stayed home with their young daughter, Chloe. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal family, cracks were beginning to show. Vanessa had been struggling with her mental health for months. Friends and neighbors noticed she'd become increasingly withdrawn, sometimes disappearing for hours without explanation. Tyler later told investigators that his wife had been acting strangely, talking to herself, forgetting conversations they'd just had, and showing signs of severe depression. Money was tight. Tyler's construction work was seasonal, and the bills were piling up. The stress was taking its toll on their marriage, leading to more frequent arguments. What neither of them knew was that one of these arguments would destroy their lives forever. The community where they lived was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. News traveled fast, gossip faster. When trouble hit the Mitchell family, it wouldn't just affect them, it would tear apart an entire town's faith in justice. January 15, 1994, a date that would be burned into Tyler Mitchell's memory forever. It started like many other days, with an argument about money. Bills were overdue, Chloe needed new shoes, and Tyler hadn't worked in 2 weeks due to bad weather. According to Tyler's account, which he gave to police before his arrest, the argument escalated quickly. Vanessa accused him of not trying hard enough to find work. He accused her of not understanding how tough things were. Their voices grew louder, their words more hurtful. Then, suddenly, Vanessa grabbed her coat and headed for the door. "I can't do this anymore," she told Tyler. "I need to get away from here." Those would be the last words Tyler would hear his wife speak, at least for the next 10 years. Vanessa walked out into the cold January night, and Tyler, exhausted from arguing, fell asleep on the couch. When he woke up the next morning, she still wasn't home. At first, he thought she'd spent the night at her brother's house. She'd done that before when they'd fought. But when her brother called asking if Vanessa was there, Tyler knew something was wrong. What do you think was going through Tyler's mind at that moment? Had you been in his shoes, what would your first instinct have been? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious about your thoughts. For the next 2 months, the community rallied around Tyler and little Chloe. Search parties combed the surrounding woods and farmland. Volunteers posted flyers with Vanessa's picture throughout the county. The local police treated it as a standard missing person case, at first. Tyler cooperated fully with the investigation. He allowed police to search his home multiple times. He took a polygraph test, which showed no deception. He provided detailed accounts of their last conversation, their financial troubles, and Vanessa's mental health struggles. Friends and family members told police that while Tyler and Vanessa had been having marital problems, they'd never seen any signs of physical violence. Tyler had no criminal record, no history of domestic abuse, no red flags that would typically make someone a suspect in their spouse's disappearance. But as the weeks turned into months with no sign of Vanessa, the community's sympathy began to shift. Whispers started. Maybe Tyler knew more than he was saying. Maybe that argument had been worse than he'd admitted. Maybe Vanessa hadn't just walked away. Then, on March 22, 1994, everything changed. A local fisherman discovered a badly decomposed female body floating in Miller's Reservoir, about 15 miles from the Mitchell home. The body had been in the water for an estimated 2 to 3 months, exactly the time frame since Vanessa's disappearance. Police immediately focused on the physical characteristics: height, build, estimated age. The measurements seemed to match Vanessa Mitchell. But here's the crucial detail that would later expose the entire investigation's fatal flaw. The body was too decomposed for visual identification, and more importantly, it was missing a distinctive feature that Vanessa possessed. Vanessa Mitchell had a prominent surgical scar on her stomach from a childhood appendectomy. The scar was about 4 inches long and clearly visible. Everyone who knew her well, her family, her friends, even Tyler, could describe it in detail. The body found in the reservoir had no such scar. You'd think that such an obvious discrepancy would have given investigators pause. You'd think they would have questioned whether this body was really Vanessa Mitchell. You'd be wrong. Instead of investigating further, police made a decision that would haunt this case forever. They decided the body was definitely Vanessa, and if the body was Vanessa, then someone had killed her. And if someone had killed her, the most likely suspect was the last person to see her alive, her husband. This is where the investigation went from sloppy to downright negligent. Other families in the area had reported missing women with similar physical characteristics. At least 2 other families came forward claiming the body could be their missing relatives. Police dismissed these claims without proper investigation. The circumstantial evidence they built against Tyler was laughably thin. They claimed stones found near the body matched gravel from a bus route Tyler sometimes took to work. They said fabric fragments looked similar to clothes Vanessa might have worn. They pointed to the fact that Tyler was the last person to see his wife alive. None of this would have been enough to convict anyone in a fair investigation. But Tyler Mitchell wasn't going to get a fair investigation. The community pressure was intense. Local media had latched onto the story of the missing wife and the suspicious husband. People wanted answers. They wanted justice. They wanted someone to pay for what happened to Vanessa Mitchell. And Tyler Mitchell was about to pay a price no innocent person should ever have to pay. Think about this for a moment. How often do we assume that police investigations are thorough and fair? What does this case tell you about the importance of questioning authority, even when it's uncomfortable? Share your thoughts below. On April 3, 1994, police arrested Tyler Mitchell for the murder of his wife. What happened next represents one of the darkest chapters in American law enforcement, a systematic campaign of torture designed to extract a confession from an innocent man. For 10 consecutive days and nights, Tyler was subjected to continuous interrogation. He was denied sleep, denied adequate food, and denied access to an attorney. When he insisted on his innocence, the beatings began. Detective interrogators worked in shifts, ensuring that Tyler never got more than an hour or 2 of rest. They told him they had evidence they didn't possess. They said witnesses had seen him kill Vanessa. They claimed they'd found her blood in his car. All lies. The physical abuse escalated when Tyler continued to maintain his innocence. He was slapped, punched, and beaten with phone books that wouldn't leave obvious marks. During one particularly brutal session, Tyler lost part of his finger when an officer slammed his hand in a desk drawer. Under this extreme duress, Tyler's resistance finally broke. He gave them what they wanted, a confession. But here's where the torture becomes even more obvious. Tyler gave 4 completely different confessions over the next few days, each with a different motive for the alleged murder. In the first confession, he claimed he killed Vanessa during an argument about money. In the second, he said it was because she was having an affair. The third version involved a struggle over custody of their daughter. The fourth claimed it was an accident that happened during a fight. Any competent investigator would have recognized these contradictory statements as evidence that the confessions were false. But the police and prosecutors didn't want the truth, they wanted a conviction. When Tyler's family tried to hire an attorney, they were told it would cost more money than they could possibly raise. The public defender assigned to Tyler's case was overwhelmed with other cases and spent less than 4 hours total preparing for trial. The most damning evidence of police misconduct came when Tyler's family offered to pay for DNA testing that could definitively determine whether the body was really Vanessa. Police refused to allow the testing unless the family paid an exorbitant fee of $20,000, money they obviously didn't have. This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate attempt to prevent evidence that might exonerate Tyler from ever seeing the light of day. Tyler Mitchell's trial was a foregone conclusion. The prosecution presented their circumstantial evidence, the coerced confessions, and the identification of the body as Vanessa Mitchell. The defense, hampered by inadequate resources and preparation, could barely mount a coherent response. The missing scar that should have proven the body wasn't Vanessa was never mentioned in court. The contradictory confessions were presented as evidence of Tyler's guilt rather than proof of coercion. The lack of any physical evidence linking Tyler to a murder was dismissed as irrelevant. On November 15, 1994, Tyler Mitchell was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The sentence was later commuted to life in prison, but for Tyler, the difference was academic. He believed he would die behind bars for a crime that had never even been committed. The community largely supported the conviction. Local newspapers praised the investigation and prosecution. People felt that justice had been served, that Vanessa Mitchell could finally rest in peace. They had no idea that Vanessa Mitchell was very much alive. While Tyler Mitchell was being tortured into confessing to murder, while he was being tried and convicted, while he was beginning what he thought would be a life sentence, Vanessa Mitchell was living under a new identity in a distant state. Here's what actually happened on that January night in 1994. Vanessa, struggling with severe mental illness and overwhelmed by her family's financial problems, made a decision that seemed rational to her troubled mind. She would disappear, start over somewhere else, and leave her problems behind. This wasn't uncommon for people suffering from certain types of mental illness. The desire to escape, to become someone else, to run away from overwhelming problems, can become irresistible. For Vanessa, walking out that door wasn't abandoning her family. It was, in her mind, saving them from her problems. She traveled over 1,000 miles to a state where she had no connections, no history, no past to tie her to Vanessa Mitchell. She assumed a new identity, found work, and tried to build a new life. But Vanessa Mitchell wasn't a criminal mastermind. She was a troubled woman trying to escape her pain. Within a few years, she met someone new. She fell in love. She remarried and even had another child. For almost a decade, she lived this double life. She never followed the news from her old hometown. She never learned that her husband had been convicted of her murder. She never knew that her daughter was growing up believing her father was a killer and her mother was dead. But Vanessa couldn't completely cut ties with her past. She maintained secret contact with her brother, sending him letters but swearing him to secrecy about her whereabouts. She asked about Chloe, but was told her daughter was better off not knowing she was alive. Imagine the psychological torture this imposed on Vanessa's brother. He knew his sister was alive while his brother-in-law rotted in prison for her murder. He watched his niece grow up without a father, believing both her parents were lost to her forever. What would you have done in the brother's position? Could you have kept that secret, knowing an innocent man was in prison? This is one of the most morally complex aspects of this entire case. While Vanessa was building her new life, Tyler was experiencing his own form of death. Prison is brutal for anyone, but for someone convicted of killing their spouse, it's particularly dangerous. Other inmates view domestic murderers with special contempt. Tyler was attacked multiple times during his first few years in prison. He lost partial vision in one eye during a beating. He developed chronic pain from injuries that never properly healed. The psychological trauma was even worse than the physical abuse. But Tyler never gave up proclaiming his innocence. He filed appeal after appeal, each one denied. He wrote letters to lawyers, to journalists, to anyone who might listen. He maintained his innocence with such consistency and conviction that even some prison guards began to believe him. Meanwhile, Tyler's family was falling apart. His mother, consumed by grief and the financial burden of legal fees, suffered a heart attack and died while Tyler was in prison. She died believing her son was a murderer, never knowing the truth. Little Chloe, now being raised by relatives, grew up in the shadow of her father's conviction. Kids at school taunted her about having a murderer for a father. She changed schools multiple times, but the stigma followed her everywhere. The financial cost of Tyler's conviction destroyed what was left of his family. Legal fees, travel costs for prison visits, and the loss of Tyler's income left them in poverty. Chloe had to drop out of school at 16 to work and help support the family. This is the hidden cost of wrongful conviction. It doesn't just destroy the life of the innocent person behind bars. It destroys entire families, entire communities. The ripple effects spread far beyond the individual case. As the years passed, Vanessa's new life began to feel incomplete. She had love, she had a new family, but she couldn't escape the guilt of abandoning her first daughter. Mental illness had driven her away, but as she received treatment in her new state, she began to understand the true cost of her decision. By 2004, the homesickness had become unbearable. She missed her daughter. She missed her brother. She even missed the community she'd grown up in. The mental health issues that had driven her away were now being managed with medication and therapy. She began to consider returning home, but she had no idea what she would find there. In her mind, Tyler had probably remarried. Chloe was now a teenager who might not even remember her. Her brother had been vague in his letters about what was happening back home. In March 2005, 11 years after she'd walked out that door, Vanessa Mitchell made the decision to return. She told her new husband she needed to go back and make peace with her past. She didn't know she was about to make legal history. The journey back was terrifying for Vanessa. She didn't know how she'd be received. She didn't know if Tyler would want to see her. She certainly never imagined that he'd been in prison for the last decade, convicted of her murder. When Vanessa's bus pulled into the station in her old hometown, she felt like she was returning from the dead. She had no idea how literally true that feeling was. On March 28, 2005, Vanessa Mitchell walked up to the door of her old home. She knocked softly, not sure who might answer. When a neighbor opened the door instead of Tyler, Vanessa's confusion began. "I'm looking for Tyler Mitchell," she said. "I'm his wife, Vanessa." The neighbor stared at her as if she'd seen a ghost. Which, in a sense, she had. "You can't be Vanessa Mitchell," the neighbor stammered. "Vanessa Mitchell is dead. Tyler killed her 10 years ago. He's in prison." At that moment, Vanessa's world collapsed. Everything she thought she understood about her decision to leave, about the life she'd left behind, crumbled in an instant. Her husband was in prison. Her daughter had grown up without either parent. Her family had been destroyed by her decision to disappear. Word of Vanessa's return spread through the community like wildfire. Within hours, reporters were calling. Police were scrambling to figure out what to do. Legal experts were trying to understand how something like this could have happened. At Riverside State Penitentiary, guards approached Tyler Mitchell with news that would change his life. His wife was alive, and he was going home. Tyler's first reaction wasn't joy, it was disbelief. For 10 years, he'd maintained his innocence while everyone told him he was a liar. Now suddenly the truth was undeniable. But the vindication felt hollow after so much had been lost. The legal proceedings moved quickly once Vanessa's identity was confirmed. DNA testing, the same testing police had blocked 10 years earlier, proved conclusively that the body found in the reservoir was not Vanessa Mitchell. Tyler was released on bail within days and formally exonerated on April 13, 2005. But for the Mitchell family, this wasn't a happy ending. It was just the beginning of a different kind of tragedy. What emotions do you think Tyler felt when he learned his wife was alive? Relief? Anger? Betrayal? How would you react if you discovered that someone you loved had allowed you to suffer for years for something you didn't do? Tyler Mitchell walked out of prison a broken man. 10 years of incarceration had taken a devastating toll on his physical and mental health. He was partially blind, suffered from chronic pain, and showed signs of severe PTSD from his treatment during interrogation and his years behind bars. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the emotional destruction. Tyler learned that his mother had died believing he was a murderer. He discovered that his daughter Chloe, now 18, had grown up in poverty and shame because of his conviction. The community that had once supported his family had turned against them. Most devastating of all was seeing Vanessa again. The woman he'd once loved, the woman whose disappearance had destroyed his life, was standing before him asking for forgiveness. But Tyler had no forgiveness left to give. "I don't want to see her," Tyler told reporters. "I just want a simple, peaceful life." The reunion between Vanessa and Chloe was equally tragic. Chloe had spent her entire adolescence believing her mother was dead and her father was a killer. Learning that her mother had been alive all along, living happily with a new family while Chloe struggled in poverty, was almost too much to bear. Vanessa's guilt was overwhelming. She had left to escape her problems, never imagining that her disappearance would create far worse problems for everyone she'd left behind. Her mental illness explained her actions, but couldn't excuse the consequences. The state offered Tyler financial compensation, approximately $700,000 for his wrongful conviction. But no amount of money could restore his mother's life, repair his relationship with his daughter, or give him back the decade he'd lost. The Mitchell case sparked nationwide conversations about wrongful convictions, police misconduct, and the reliability of confessions obtained under duress. Legal experts pointed out that if torture could produce 4 different confessions from the same person, how many other innocent people might be behind bars based on similar coerced statements? The case also highlighted the problems with circumstantial evidence and the dangers of investigative tunnel vision. Police had been so convinced that Tyler was guilty that they ignored evidence pointing to his innocence and refused to consider alternative explanations for Vanessa's disappearance. Perhaps most troubling was the revelation that simple DNA testing could have prevented this entire tragedy. The same test that conclusively proved Tyler's innocence in 2005 could have done so in 1994, but police had deliberately blocked it. The Mitchell case led to significant reforms in the state's criminal justice system. New rules required recording of all interrogations, mandated DNA testing in certain cases, and created conviction review units to examine potentially false convictions. But these reforms came too late for Tyler Mitchell and his family. Today, Tyler Mitchell lives quietly in a small town far from where these events took place. He never remarried and maintains minimal contact with his daughter. The trauma of his experience has left him isolated and suspicious of others. Chloe Mitchell struggled with substance abuse and mental health issues throughout her 20s. The childhood trauma of losing both parents, one to death, one to prison, and then learning the truth has had lasting effects on her life. Vanessa returned to her new family, but continued to struggle with guilt over the consequences of her actions. She has had no contact with Tyler since his release and limited contact with Chloe. The body found in Miller's Reservoir was eventually identified as that of another missing woman from a neighboring county. Her family finally got the closure they'd been seeking for over a decade, but their tragedy had been overshadowed by the Mitchell case. The Tyler Mitchell case stands as one of the most shocking examples of wrongful conviction in American legal history. It demonstrates how quickly a justice system can fail when investigators prioritize conviction over truth, when torture is used to extract confessions, and when inconvenient evidence is ignored or suppressed. But this case also raises difficult questions about moral responsibility. Vanessa Mitchell wasn't a criminal. She was a woman suffering from mental illness who made a decision that had unintended catastrophic consequences. While Tyler was the obvious victim of injustice, Vanessa was also a victim of her own mental health struggles. The real villains in this story are the police officers who tortured an innocent man, the prosecutors who built a case on lies, and a system that allowed politics and public pressure to override truth and justice. Sometimes the most shocking true crime stories aren't about murder at all. They're about the murder of justice itself. The Mitchell case reminds us that our legal system is only as good as the people who operate it, and that the presumption of innocence isn't just a legal principle, it's a moral imperative. Tyler Mitchell spent 10 years in prison for a crime that never happened, convicted of murdering a woman who was alive and well 1,000 miles away. His story should serve as a warning about what happens when we let our desire for quick answers override our commitment to truth. What do you think? Could something like this happen in your community? How can we prevent future Tyler Mitchells from falling through the cracks of our justice system? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. This is a conversation we all need to have. The knock on Tyler Mitchell's door in 2005 didn't just free an innocent man. It exposed the fragility of the very system designed to protect us all.